On a late winter afternoon, the sky hung gray over the small town of Dorchester by the Avon River. The bitter cold made everyone on the street bow their heads against the chill, warm breaths misting in the frigid air. Despite the gloomy weather, the town's central hall was uncharacteristically bustling. Rumor had it that Donald Trump, the former U.S. president someone villagers had only seen on television, would be visiting that very evening. Dorchester was a quiet place, rarely visited by internationally renowned figures. News of Donald Trump's arrival to deliver a talk set everyone abuzz. Some were curious to hear his thoughts on economics and politics. Others simply wanted to see, in person, a figure they'd only known from the media. A few hoped to hear him speak about life stories rarely told in the usual glitzy setting, stories that revealed a more personal side. Cars lined the main road, and people filed through the entrance of the old, somewhat shabby hall. Inside, the heating system was on, chasing away the biting wind that whistled beyond the windows. Warm yellow light bulbs glowed, while gentle background music created an inviting atmosphere. Men, women, and even children of all ages took seats on long wooden benches. Some older folks wore worn-out winter coats, younger families came with bright-eyed kids, and working-age adults, both men and women, looked eager. In the third row, right near the aisle, a 9-year-old girl named Emma fidgeted with anticipation. Emma wore a sky-blue sweater and a knit cap pulled down close to her eyebrows. What set her apart was a faded purple scarf around her neck. Next to her was her mother, Claire, who kept reminding Emma not to make too much noise. Emma looked quite ordinary, yet something about her, perhaps her bright, inquisitive eyes, reflected hope and a touch of anxiety. On Emma's lap was an old Bible, its cover peeling at the edges and its pages yellowed. It was a keepsake from her grandmother. Emma intended to ask a question tonight if she could. Her mother had told her, "If you truly want to ask, don't be afraid. I know you can do it." Underscore 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 underscore. At exactly 7 in the evening, the event's host, Richard, an older gentleman with silvery hair, took the stage. His warm, resonant voice filled the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight our small town of Dorchester has the honor of welcoming a very special guest. I'm sure you all know him by name, but perhaps not the personal stories that lie behind the public aura. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Donald Trump." Applause broke out. Some clapped enthusiastically, others seemed more reserved. Down in the audience, Emma tightened her grip on the purple scarf. She looked up at the stage, where Donald Trump appeared, tall, sporting his familiar hairstyle, dressed in a black suit with a red tie. He waved to the crowd with that familiar show of confidence. Yet, to everyone's surprise, he didn't come across as boisterous as on TV. Likely because this wasn't a political rally but a smaller, rather intimate local gathering. His gaze swept across the room, pausing upon Emma, at whom he flashed a momentary smile. Emma swallowed hard, her heart pounding. After shaking hands with Richard, Donald Trump approached a battered wooden lectern. Straightening his posture, he began, "First of all, I want to thank the town of Dorchester for hosting me. Frankly, I never imagined coming to such a peaceful place to share my thoughts. Most of you know me from real estate projects, political campaigns, and social media. But there's a personal side to me that I seldom reveal in public, a story about faith that I rarely have the chance to discuss." People in the audience leaned in. Emma's hand clutched her old Bible, the scarf resting warmly around her neck. She couldn't help wondering, is he really open to hearing my story? Trump continued, "When I was young, my parents taught me about faith. We attended church, reading the Bible. As I grew older, I immersed myself in business, always striving to prove myself. People say I've been successful, yet I've also suffered losses and faced my share of worries. At times, I questioned whether God was even listening. Later, life's trials taught me that faith often registers strongest when we're confronted with hardship. The hall quieted. A few elderly folks gazed intently at him. Emma squeezed her mother's hand, her expression thoughtful. Emma's mind drifted to the purple scarf wrapped snugly around her neck. It was a gift from her grandmother, Agnes, who knitted it when Emma was little. Her grandmother had once explained, "Winters in Dorchester are harsh, sometimes so cold they can break one's spirit. But you must stay warm, and keep your faith. Whether it's in God or something good in life, faith will see you through." Sadly, Grandmother Agnes had passed away about a year ago from heart disease. Ever since, Emma had felt a gaping emptiness. She slept clutching the scarf, wore it every time she went out. Sometimes she would place her hand on the Bible, wanting to ask, why did God take Granny away? But she didn't know whom to trust with that question, or how to find an answer. Tonight, at her mother's urging, Emma had made up her mind to ask Donald Trump a related question. "Sir, do you believe God listens to us when we're in pain?" Deep down, she was desperate to know, how do we move on after someone we love is gone? After about 40 minutes, Donald Trump paused, resting his hands on the lectern as he scanned the crowd. "I've talked quite a bit. Now I'd like to hear from you. You're welcome to ask about economics, politics, or even personal experiences. Who would like to start?" A handful of middle-aged men stood up to ask about policy and business, while a few homemakers inquired about his views on family. Trump, in his customary style, gave confident yet friendly replies. Emma waited until the crowd died down. Summoning courage, she took her mother's hand and rose. She walked slowly along the aisle toward the microphone. Initially, people paid little attention, but when they spotted the tiny girl with a worn purple scarf, they stepped aside to let her through. Donald Trump halted. He studied the young girl. Then he offered a small smile, perhaps out of curiosity. Leaning down, he said, "Hello there. What's your name?" Emma took a deep breath, her voice trembling yet audible. "My name is Emma, and I have a question. Mr. Trump, do you believe in God? And, do you think God is still listening when I'm sad?" Silence seemed to descend on the entire room. It might have been a simple question, but under these circumstances, it resonated powerfully. Donald Trump seemed startled. He was more accustomed to queries about policy or even about his personal life, rarely something so direct about faith. He adjusted his tie, inhaling slowly. "Emma," he began calmly, "I do believe in God. I believe there's a higher being guiding us. But maybe what you really want to know isn't just whether I believe, but whether God hears you when you're sad, right?" Emma nodded, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. She lowered her gaze to the old Bible, tracing its worn cover with her fingertips. Trump spoke gently, "Would you mind sharing why you're asking this?" Emma hesitated, then clung to her mother's hand for reassurance. Claire nodded softly, urging her daughter on. Finding the strength, Emma replied, "I lost my grandma about a year ago. Since then, I haven't been sure if God can hear me, like maybe he's forgotten me. I feel empty, like there's nobody left to protect me." Her voice trailed off, quavering. Already some in the audience were dabbing their eyes. Donald Trump leaned in closer, resting his hands on the lectern. "Sweet girl, I lost someone just as important, my brother, Fred. I understand that anger and doubt toward God, and wondering if anyone's listening. But I believe our faith doesn't vanish. Even when we're overwhelmed by grief, God remains, quietly watching." "So is he listening to you?" "Yes, Emma, just in his own way. Emma sniffled, glancing up at him. She seemed to want to ask more, but her voice caught in her throat. Trump hesitated, then extended an invitation. Would you like to come up here? I want to hear more about your story. The spectators murmured in surprise. A 9-year-old girl, being invited on stage beside Donald Trump, was certainly extraordinary. Emma's mother gave her a supportive nod, guiding her up the steps. Underscore 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 underscore. On stage, Emma stood next to Donald Trump, a striking image. A towering political figure known worldwide, dressed in a suit and red tie, side by side with a small girl wearing a faded purple scarf, eyes clouded by sorrow. Trump lightly placed a hand on her shoulder, addressing her. You said your grandmother passed away. Did she leave anything for you? Emma held out the old Bible. This. She read it with me every night. I still read it, but I'm not sure my prayers go anywhere. Trump frowned sympathetically, letting his palm rest on the Bible cover. His gaze turned pensive, as though recalling something from his own life. When my brother passed away while I was still young, I blamed him. I even blamed God, thinking, if God truly exists, how could he let Fred die? It took me years to realize that our sorrow can become our lesson. If you let it, grief teaches you to cherish life and those still around you. Turning to Emma with an almost fatherly tone, he said, So, Emma, remember that each time you think of your grandmother, you're keeping her alive in your heart. That's one way God connects us with those who have moved on. Emma's tears welled. She whispered, I still say my prayers, but sometimes I feel so alone. Trump shook his head gently. You're never alone. Sometimes God responds to us through people or circumstances, maybe through me, or your mom, or someone else who offers you comfort. Don't think you're on your own. Applause rose softly. Host Richard approached, beaming with emotion. This is very moving. Emma, is there anything else you want to ask Mr. Trump? Emma bowed her head briefly, summoning her courage. I want to know how I can be happy again, like before Grandma left. Donald Trump's expression softened, his furrowed brow reflecting empathy. He glanced out at the audience, then returned his gaze to Emma, speaking quietly, My dear, sometimes we can't just go back to the way we were. Loss changes us. Yet, we can learn to move forward as a newer version of ourselves, one who appreciates life more deeply, who loves harder. Joy will return in small, everyday things, your mother's smile, kindness from a stranger, or even moments like these on stage. Let your grandmother live on in you, and through that, you'll find happiness for both of you. Emma seemed entranced, no one had ever given her such advice before. Nodding slowly, tears trickled from her eyes. When Emma's dialogue with Trump ended, Richard guided her back to her seat. A wave of warmth enveloped her, and many in the crowd gave her gentle pats on the shoulder, murmuring, You're so brave, sweetheart. Claire hugged her, tears glistening. That moment triggered a chain reaction of confessions throughout the hall. A middle-aged woman stood and requested the microphone. Mr. Trump, I've also suffered a great loss. My husband passed away in an accident 2 years ago. After that, I felt like life had no meaning. People urged me to go to church, but I was terrified to face my pain. Do you have advice for me? Donald Trump sighed sympathetically. I'm not a therapist, but I learned that being afraid of one's pain is natural. But sometimes, the bravest thing is accepting sadness, crying if you must, and slowly reaching out to someone you trust. If you believe in God, try going to church or simply spend quiet time, or speak to a photo of your loved one. It may feel vulnerable, but vulnerability is part of healing. Tears streamed down the woman's face. Around the hall, discreet sniffles arose. Many recognized themselves in this shared grief. Overwhelmed by these deeply personal stories, Donald Trump raised his hands gently. With a hint of humor, he said, "Let's take a brief pause, shall we? I didn't expect tonight to delve so deeply into personal feelings, but I'm grateful it has. Let's take a 15-minute break. Please grab some tea or coffee and, if needed, a moment to compose yourselves." A light chuckle rippled through the crowd. People stood, chatting quietly as they headed to the refreshment corner. A few filed over to Emma to offer kind words. She awkwardly acknowledged their compliments, feeling both shy and relieved. "Well done," her mother whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Emma smiled back, wiping away tears. "Mom, I'm still sad, but it's like a weight's lifted." "I hope Grandma would be happy I asked." During the break, Donald Trump left the stage to mingle. He shook hands, posed for snapshots with a few fans. Eventually, his gaze settled upon Emma, who stood near the refreshment table cradling a cup of hot cocoa. He made his way over, trailed by interested onlookers. "Hey, Emma, hot cocoa, huh? Great on a chilly evening, right?" Emma nodded shyly, whispering her thanks. Trump noticed her tattered Bible. "Do you read it often?" he asked. She replied, "Yes. I usually read the Lord is my shepherd passage. Grandma used to read it with me. Now I'm alone, so I worry God might not be listening to me by myself." Shaking his head, Trump responded warmly, "Don't think that. God always hears us, even when we don't speak aloud. And who knows? Through you, he might be reaching someone else." Emma ventured timidly. "Mr. Trump, aren't you afraid people will see you as weak for talking about faith? On TV they show you as always strong, always winning." He gave a wry smile. "I know. I used to be obsessed with proving my strength. But after losses, I realized there's no weakness in discussing faith. In fact, we all have vulnerable moments. Acknowledging them is true strength." Emma gazed silently, amazed at how different he seemed from his TV persona. When the event resumed, participants returned to their seats. Richard held the microphone, inviting more questions. A tired-looking man in a leather jacket stood. "Mr. Trump, I always admired your decisiveness. But tonight, I'm surprised and moved by the softer side. I want to ask, how do you balance family and personal ambition?" "I poured myself into making money, ignoring my wife and child. When we lost our son in an accident, I realized how much precious time I'd wasted." "Do you think you yourself ever sacrificed family for your career?" It was a heavy question, and many attendees watched Trump intently. Emma likewise listened closely. He gently nodded. "I'm not perfect. When I was younger, I was consumed by business, caught up in fame. But after my brother died, I did a lot of soul-searching. It's tragic that we often realize our mistakes too late. Still, it's never truly too late. I eventually learned to value family, be there for my kids, and hear them out. As for your regret about your son, I'm sorry for your loss. Please try to forgive yourself. That's your first step. There's always a chance to change, even if grief has already hit." The man broke down and sat, softly thanking Trump. Across the auditorium, hearts stirred with empathy. Some reached for tissues, others sniffled in solidarity. Through subsequent questions, Emma realized she wasn't alone. So many people in the room had lost loved ones, questioned their faith, or wrestled with sorrow. All of them were asking the same questions as Emma. Are we hearing God's voice? Are we on our own? Camera flashes flickered occasionally, and local reporters took notes. Surprisingly, Emma, alongside Donald Trump, became a focal point. Her innocent yet profound query had deeply resonated with people. Her mother, Claire, seated next to her, watched as her daughter rose to a new maturity, openly expressing grief and courage in front of this crowd. She was awed by how sincerely Donald Trump responded, stripping away his usual bravado. A gentle-faced elderly woman, Helen, spoke up next. She explained that she had lost her best friend, who used to work with her at the local library. Her friend passed away unexpectedly, and Helen found herself unable to go back to the library for fear of missing that familiar presence. "Mr. Trump," she asked, voice trembling, "do you have any advice for me? I can't face those memories alone." Trump listened intently. We often avoid locations tied to painful memories, but facing them can be the catalyst for healing. For instance, after Fred died, I avoided my old family home because everything reminded me of him. But I eventually returned, touched his photos, checked his old dresser. I wept, but I felt relief. The memories were sad, but also beautiful. Maybe you can go to that library, sit in your old spot, and feel your friend's presence. You might find comfort. Helen nodded tearfully, whispering thanks. Listening to every story, Emma realized her loneliness was gradually lifting. She gripped her mother's hand, Grandma Agnes's image flooding her mind, how she'd sit there knitting the scarf while telling Emma about heaven. "I believe in heaven, Emma, dear. Death is but a move from one place to another. Missing and loving each other is our bond between these worlds." "Grandma," Emma reflected silently. "You see? I dared to ask if God hears me. And the answer is yes. I shouldn't give up." Her eyes shone with a new resolve. She wanted to reclaim joy, for herself and her grandmother. The event was brimming with open hearts. A young man named Jake raised his hand, holding a guitar. "Mr. Trump," he said, "I'm a street musician. I've composed a song about faith but never had the courage to play it for anyone. I'm afraid of being ridiculed. Any advice?" Trump chuckled softly. "I've been ridiculed more times than I can count. People claim I only care about real estate or politics, that talking about God is forced. But if you're sincere, if you deeply believe, it doesn't matter what others say. So how about you play us a snippet right now?" The crowd murmured in surprised delight. Jake hopped onto the stage, sat, and strummed softly. His tune was slow, warm, rippling with hope. Occasionally, he sang in a rough, heartfelt voice, "In silent nights and distant days, my heart forgets to speak. But in the dark, a voice calls near, a gentle light I seek. Cling to faith and let it burn, a flame once small but strong. Though the world is wide and fraught, love will linger on." He might not have possessed the smoothest vocals, yet the earnestness touched everyone. When he finished, applause echoed. Trump smiled. "I'm no music critic, but I say go for it. Thank you for sharing." The conversation wound toward an end. Another man stood up, tired lines under his eyes. He revealed that he had lost contact with his father for years, harboring deep resentment because his father was always absent. Now his father had died, leaving him with regret. "Mr. Trump," he asked in a raw voice, "do you think it's important to forgive someone who's gone?" Donald Trump's brow furrowed in empathy. "Yes, absolutely. My brother Fred and I had disputes over lifestyles. After he died, I blamed him, blamed myself. But holding on to blame doesn't bring anyone back. By making peace and forgiving them, we free ourselves. It's also a way to pay them respect." The man nodded, fighting back tears. "I'll try," he said under his breath. They had been talking for over 2 hours. This was nothing like Donald Trump's typical political speeches. Indeed, it veered into deeply heartfelt territory. Host Richard returned to the stage and took the microphone. "Everyone feeling that? Tonight we vividly explored faith, grief, and healing, thanks partly to Emma for starting us on this path. Emma, thank you. A wave of applause for Emma swept through the hall. She rose slightly, her cheeks flushed, returning a small bow. Donald Trump also clapped for her. Then he turned, smiling kindly. This young girl is truly special. Emma, do you realize you posed a question many adults are too shy, or too proud, to ask? She managed a faint grin. I just really miss my grandma and needed to know if God still hears me. He nodded. He does, and so does your grandma. It seemed Emma's sincerity encouraged Donald Trump to open up even more about his brother. Folding his hands, he said solemnly, decades ago, my brother Fred struggled with alcoholism. I didn't understand him. I wasn't there for him enough. Then he died, and I was left furious with him, furious with God, wondering why it happened. In time, though, I realized losing Fred taught me to appreciate life, opened my eyes to the dangers of alcohol, changed me forever. In that sense, Fred still lives in me, guiding and warning me. The audience fell silent. Some mourners wept, empathetic to his sense of loss. He concluded, Emma, if God doesn't answer right away, don't worry. Sometimes, it takes time and experience for us to notice his voice. She nodded thoughtfully, her heart brimming with gratitude. At this point, Richard announced a final activity. Anyone who wished could write a note about something unsaid to a departed loved one or to themselves and place it in a box labeled Words Left Unspoken. The idea was to collectively store these quiet confessions. People crowded around to scribble on slips of paper. Some wrote of their despair, others wrote prayers, or simply jotted down the names of those they had lost. Emma opened her small notebook, pen in hand. Grandma, I believe God hears me now. I hope you do too. I'm still sad. But Donald Trump said it's okay to be sad. I know you haven't left me. I'll be strong and live forward, for you and for me. Love you. She folded her paper, and her mother dropped it into the box with the rest. As the session wound down, some folks lingered to greet Donald Trump or request autographs. An elderly lady, trembling, reached for his hands, sobbing. Mr. Trump, I don't share your politics, but thank you for tonight. You've shown me something new. He smiled gently. Ma'am, before politics or business, we're all human. And as humans, we all have pain that needs sharing. Emma, standing off to the side, felt a wave of warmth wash over her. She realized that the night had been bigger than her own grief. She'd witnessed countless people letting go of burdens and trusting each other with their pain. When picture-taking and signing concluded, Donald Trump looked around for Emma. Spotting her nearby with her mother, he approached and stooped down. Emma, may I see your Bible for a moment? She handed it over carefully. He flipped through some dog-eared pages, pausing at the underlined verses. Then, pulling out a pen from his jacket, he wrote on the inside cover, Dear Emma, trust that God is always listening, and so is the grandmother who loves you. Sincerely, Donald Trump. He closed the book and handed it back. I'm no pastor, and this is no fancy message, but I hope those words remind you never to lose hope. Emma took the Bible, her hand shaking with emotion. She looked up, voice quavering, Thank you, sir. I never knew you could be so warm. With a wry grin, he said, Well, I'm human, not made of stone. She giggled softly. Eventually, the crowd dispersed into the cold night. Outside, a white fog drifted under the lampposts along the street. Claire helped Emma into her coat, and they made their way through the last cluster of people. At the doorway, Emma slowed, glancing back. Trump still stood near the stage, shaking the last few hands, exchanging goodbyes. He caught Emma's eye and raised a hand in farewell, smiling. She waved back, then stepped outside with her mother. Wind gusts whipped their cheeks, but Emma no longer felt the biting chill. She held her mother's hand, recalling everything Trump had told her. "How do you feel, Emma?" Claire asked quietly. Emma released a long breath, her voice steady. "Weirdly calm. I'm still sad, but I don't feel so lonely anymore. I think Grandma would be proud I asked about God's listening." Her mother squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you. I'm sure Grandma's proud, too." Over the next few days, Dorchester locals regularly mentioned Donald Trump's visit. They whispered, half amazed, "He wasn't the same guy we see on TV, was he? He was so open, talking about his brother and faith." For Emma, the memory of that night was indelible. Each time she ran her fingers over the inscription in her Bible, she remembered his words, "Never lose hope." She started sleeping better. Although she'd still wrap the purple scarf around her neck at bedtime, and it still reminded her of Grandma, she found peace in the thought that God and her grandmother heard her prayers. She wrote in her diary, "Today, I felt okay. I believe God hears me. Grandma's gone, but her memory stays. I can keep living on." 2 weeks later, their house phone rang on a drizzly morning. Claire answered with her usual cheer, then gaped in surprise. Once off the line, she turned to Emma. "That was Mr. Richard, the host from the other night. They're organizing another event with several high-profile guests. He wants you to come share your story because you inspired everyone at Dorchester to speak out about grief." Emma's jaw dropped. "Me? I'm just a kid." Claire ruffled her hair. "Yes, but you helped open hearts. It's up to you, no pressure." Scrunching her face in thought, Emma murmured, "If Grandma were here, would she want me to do it?" Emma eventually agreed. On the event day, her mother drove her to a bigger hall in nearby Bristol. It was much grander, with bright stage lights and a crowd that included reporters. Emma grew nervous. Richard greeted her warmly. "We have several speakers talking about faith and life. You'll be the final one, just 5 minutes. Ready?" Emma cupped her beloved purple scarf with trembling fingers. "I'm ready." When her turn came, she stepped onto a large stage. The spotlight felt intense, a microphone overshadowing her petite form. She cleared her throat. "Hello everyone, I'm Emma, 9 years old, from Dorchester. I was very sad after losing my grandmother. I thought God wasn't listening anymore until the day I met Mr. Donald Trump." The crowd murmured with curiosity. Emma, her voice still soft, gave a short recap of that unforgettable night, concluding, "I realized that sometimes we want God to answer quickly, but maybe He answers in His own time. And even if we still feel sad, we can allow ourselves to heal. I still miss my grandma, but I feel less afraid, because I know she remains with me, and God hears my prayers." Thunderous applause rang out. Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she stepped back from the mic. Her mother hurried up, enveloping her in a hug. After the talks, a female journalist interviewed Emma, praising her heartfelt speech. "Emma, do you have plans for your future? Do you want to continue inspiring others?" Emma considered, her gaze bright. "I just want to grow up well, care for my mom, write down stories, and always keep Grandma in my heart." The journalist smiled. "I think you could do much good." "Thank you, Emma." In the following days, a local newspaper ran an article headlined, "Little Girl Emma Asks Donald Trump If God Still Listens." It described the tearful moment at the Dorchester Hall, remarking how a child's straightforward question could evoke such genuine compassion. Weeks bled into months, winter's grip eased into the gentle warmth of spring. In their tiny backyard, Emma and her mother planted slender purple flowers. Sunshine bathed Emma's face. Within her, Grandma Agnes's memory lingered, but that old ache turned into a tender longing. Sometimes Emma opened her Bible, smiling at Trump's inscription. She would remember his assurance that God's listening in his own way. Whenever sorrow crept in, she'd recall how she had found acceptance for it. One Sunday afternoon, Emma and her mother sat by the Avon River. She opened her notebook, brainstorming a story about her grandmother. She wanted to weave in the purple scarf and the promises of faith. Scribbling the first lines, that evening, Dorchester welcomed a very special visitor. Emma paused, tears pricking her eyes at the recollection of heartbreak. Then she also remembered Trump's supportive hand on her shoulder, his words, "God hasn't abandoned you, Emma. He's just speaking differently." About half a year later, Emma learned that Donald Trump was coming to the UK again. Her mother teased, "Think he remembers you?" Emma shrugged, "He's too busy for that." Surprisingly, Claire got a phone call from Trump's assistant. Donald Trump was hosting a short public tea party with families for a philanthropic project and wanted Emma there. He recalled her as the girl who opened a conversation about faith. Emma was stunned but excited. She arrived at a classic London venue with her mother, wearing a pink dress and still her signature purple scarf. The room was filled with formally dressed guests. Emma felt shy, but she glimpsed Donald Trump entering. She gave a little wave. He recognized her immediately, walking over with a grin. "Emma. Great to see you again. How are you?" She bobbed her head politely. "I'm doing fine. How are you?" Trump clasped his hands, busy, as always. "But I'm focusing more on children's initiatives. I remember the question you asked me, and it made me reflect deeply." "So, thank you." Emma looked taken aback. "You're thanking me? You're famous, after all." Laughing, he replied, "Oh, come on. You reminded me that some things matter more than politics or money, pain, faith, and family love. Your simple question was actually profound." She blushed, and Claire snapped a photo, capturing their brief but heartfelt exchange. When the tea party ended, Trump shook Emma's hand goodbye. His gaze was gentle. "Emma, we may be miles apart, but don't let that keep you from believing in your future. You'll slip and fall many times, but remember that faith and love will carry you onward. Give my regards to your mother." She nodded, voice tight with emotion. "I will. Thank you so much." As Emma walked away, her purple scarf fluttered in a light breeze. Hugging it, she whispered, "Grandma, I get it now. God never abandoned me, I just didn't see all the little signs he was sending. I'll live strong, for both of us." And so Emma's journey moved forward, ever marked by that night in Dorchester, the question she posed to Donald Trump, and the tears and smiles shared by everyone there. It transcended politics or fame, speaking instead to the deepest need for human faith and empathy, a quiet but powerful reminder that a sincerely asked question can bridge hearts, help us overcome loss, and nurture hope for tomorrow.